Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jacob. Merci beaucoup, puis merci pour l'invitation d'être parmi vous ce matin. Um, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous peoples of all of the lands we are on today. While we're meeting on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local indigenous peoples and their cultures. So thank you, Jacob, and to the Energy Council of Canada, as well as the United States Energy Association for convening today's conversations. I'm pleased to provide you with a brief glimpse into Canada's electricity landscape, as well as our mutually beneficial ongoing relationship with the United States. CEA, one of the oldest associations in Canada, is the national forum and voice of the evolving electricity business here. Our 41 members in every province and territory generate, transmit, distribute, and market electric energy to industrial, commercial, and residential customers across Canada and into the United States every day. It goes without saying that Canada's rich supply of hydro is enviable around the world. In fact, Canada is the second largest producer of hydro in the world, second only to China, and it powers much of Quebec, British Columbia, and Manitoba. Currently, 60% of all Canadian electricity is generated by hydro. Much of our economically available hydropower has been developed, and as a result, CEA member companies are investing in other renewables, including wind and solar, looking to convert existing coal-fired power plants, and exploring storage opportunities as they work to decarbonize the electricity sector and meet aggressive emissions reduction targets that have been established by the federal government. Across the country, our member companies are electrifying their fleets. They're investing in extensive charging networks, exploring large-scale storage, investing in and researching CCS utilization and direct air capture, and they're making the most of energy efficiency opportunities. Many of these innovative projects have been recognized by CEA's Center of Excellence. Now, nuclear generation, currently representing 16% of electricity supply in Canada. By the way, it also meets the majority of the electricity needs in Ontario, will also play an increasingly important role as the country sees the growth in electrification. Our entire sector anxiously awaits the development of Canada's first small modular reactors, currently scheduled for 2028 by Ontario Power Generation. And I'm sure my colleague, John Gorman, will have more to say on this in a little while. But the technology is going to have massive potential, and it will assist in providing a long-term source of base load supply onto the grid. And SMRs will also be integral to getting northern communities off diesel. I'm certain nuclear generation will grow as SMRs become a viable option for Canada. In 2021, our association engaged electricity leaders from across the country in a series of conversations about a net zero future. And some of these conversations were on my podcast, The Flux Capacitor. These leaders noted that to meet the government's 2030 targets, 2035 net zero electricity grid and 2050 net zero targets, it's going to take a perfect blend of new technologies, growth in renewables, development of storage, and development of new infrastructure, including transmission. This past June, Net Zero 2050 legislation was approved by the Canadian Parliament. Electricity companies in Canada are following suit, announcing similar targets and action plans. Canada's electricity sector is already one of the cleanest in the world, with more than 82% of electricity being generated by non-emitting sources. As a sector, we've already achieved the targets established by the Paris Accord, which was reducing greenhouse gases by over 30% below the 2005 levels. That target was set for 2035. In fact, since the year 2000, the Canadian electricity industry has reduced its GHG emissions by 47%. A government-funded think tank, the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices, analyzed 60 pathways that it said could achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And it characterized a variety of carbon reduction actions, either as safe bets or as wildcards. And not surprisingly, actions related to the increased use of electricity were in the safe bets category. From this report and others, there's a recognition of the central role electricity will play in decarbonization and a need to increase electricity generation by 2 to 3 times to meet our 2050 ambitions. We're seeing this in the transportation sector alone, with interest in electric vehicles skyrocketing beyond the capabilities of manufacturers to meet that demand. In 2020, we saw the purchase of nearly 52,000 electric vehicles, with thousands of Canadians experiencing long lead times to secure a new electric vehicle. All this to say, the growing need to electrify different sectors, coupled with the drive to decarbonize, is creating urgency to build generation capacity. Our sector is working hard to meet targets established by the Government of Canada, all while adapting to and building resilience against the challenging climate. And we're continuing to see the increased number of extreme weather events caused by the changing climate, resulting in more customer interruptions. If we compare 5-year periods, 2011-2015 with 2016-2020, there was a 30% increase in major weather events leading to outages. These weather events are becoming more destructive as the accumulated duration of hours of impact has increased by over 24%. In the spring of 2021, we saw the destruction of an entire town in British Columbia as a result of a forest fire. And just 2 months ago, severe and unprecedented flooding, also in BC, left thousands of Canadians without power, water, or basic infrastructure. We recently released a publication in partnership with the Government of Canada on preparing for a changing climate by building more resilient infrastructure. While we can't stop extreme weather events from happening, we can certainly work to ensure Canadians continue to receive reliable electricity. The value of North American partnerships continues to be one of this sector's greatest strengths as we work to ensure electricity system reliability and resilience in the face of other major transformations and challenges like climate change. Canada and the US are custodians of a highly integrated electricity transmission grid connected by over 35 cross-border transmission lines. Every Canadian province along the US border is electrically connected with at least one neighboring US state, which allows for bi-directional trade. This two-way exchange and integration enable electricity supply to meet demand in the most efficient manner. It increases resilience and reliability through supply diversity and increased operational flexibility. And it contributes to affordable and increasingly clean energy for customers in both the US and Canada. Remember Texas last year? Our interconnections allowed Canadian companies who are well-versed in cold weather operations to help serve US load during the extreme weather events experienced in early 2021. And thankfully, mutual assistance remains a hallmark of our industry. As we see more storms, unprecedented heat, and wildfires across both Canada and the US, we will find better ways to adapt to and respond to more extreme weather and a changing climate. The partnerships make us more resilient in the face of an evolving and increasingly complex cyber threat environment. Over the past few months, we've witnessed evidence of these threats, from ransomware attacks to supply chain compromises. Given the threats, more sophisticated threat actors, and critical infrastructure interdependencies, no one company, country, government, or sector can defend and respond in isolation. Partnerships between industry on both sides of the border, with our government partners, and with other sectors ensure that we have more smart people working together on these challenges in a unity of effort, sharing threat information, and collectively developing new technologies, practices, and tools to keep us safer. As both Canada and the US look towards achieving a cleaner energy future, connections can help ensure we unlock more clean, reliable, and affordable electricity for the customers that need it. Electricity companies also remain focused on growing Indigenous relationships through reconciliation, consultation, and partnerships. The Canadian Parliament in 2021 enshrined in law the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The reaffirmation of relationships between Canada and Indigenous peoples has grown significantly over the last few years, and so has Indigenous inclusion within the energy industry. CEA strongly supports the Government of Canada's recent efforts to advance reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Chris Henderson, the Executive Director of Indigenous Clean Energy, to share more on current and future partnerships to work towards a cleaner future and advance reconciliation. Now, while there are many additional issues I could address, from the advancing technologies seen across Canada in our sector, to the advancement in our equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives across the country, to the modernization of regulatory frameworks, I know time is short. I look forward to the next several presentations. So let me summarize in this way. Canadian electricity is being relied upon to deliver our decarbonized future. Despite an operating environment characterized by a global pandemic, supply chain disruptions, rising inflation for key inputs, and an evolving cyber threat environment, we will work with governments and stakeholders to ensure we implement policies that will ensure we deliver upon our GHG reduction aspirations in a manner that safeguards customer affordability and preserves system reliability. Encore une fois, merci beaucoup d'inclure l'Association canadienne de l'électricité. Thanks once again for including CEA in the first annual State of the Energy Industry. And with that, I'll pass it back to Jacob.
Thank you very much, Francis. Oui, eh bien, il faut dire aussi que nous pouvons prendre des questions en français, tout le monde, à travers la fonction des questions-réponses. And thank you again, Francis, for your time. Quick shout out to the rest of the speakers. Anybody on the panel have a question for Francis? So I will reclaim my prerogative as the moderator, then maybe ask you one question, Francis, before continuing
Sure.
on. Is somebody once put it to me, and I thought it was compelling, is that we have a very sophisticated generation and transmission system by any estimation in the world. We are leaders. But one could argue that it's taken us over 100 years to build what we've got now. And by some estimations, to meet some of the net zero challenges, we're talking about possibly doubling our generation capacity transmission to meet it. And then needing to do that sort of in 30 years. That kind of brought home to me the stark reality of the challenge and the opportunity. What do you think about our capacity to actually rise to that occasion?
Well, that's the key question, isn't it? Right? In all of these conversations about net zero 2050, by some estimates it's going to be double or triple. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to double or triple our transmission or double or triple our grid resources. It means we have to be able to meet a demand that is going to increase by that factor. And so my personal view is the future is going to be a combination of all of the above. Every kilowatt hour of non-emitting electricity that we'll be able to produce is going to be required for us to meet that future. But that means both at the grid level and distributed energy resources. And so it's going to be a combination of the two. It doesn't mean we have to double the size of our overall grid connected resources. It's going to mean we have to do both grid connected resources, distributed energy resources, and new technology. So it really will be all across the board. By the same token, when we say it took us 130 years to build the system that we've got today, and we've got to double it in 30 years. While that's true, it is also not an impossible feat to be able to reach that, because we're talking, if you're talking about doubling something in 30 years, but that's modest growth, frankly, from year to year. But we have to get moving on it. And that's my biggest concern these days is we have a lot of aspirations, but we need to figure out exactly what those policy instruments are going to be so that we can deliver upon those policy aspirations that we've got.
I share the optimism, Francis. Thank you. And maybe I'll just elevate one question from the chat. And it's interesting because I know we also have Tim on the line. I'll just read it. How do we create harmony between natural gas and electricity sectors? They are seemingly at odds. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think the sectors themselves are necessarily seemingly at odds. In fact, there's a number of my members that are also members of Tim's organization. I don't think it is a case of either or. I've got a number of members that are currently using natural gas in the generation of electricity, a number of members that are moving from coal to natural gas, and that are also looking at technologies in the future that will be able to ensure that they can continue to use those through carbon capture, utilization, and direct air capture. The reality is, when you look at the geography of this country, that the resources are not spread evenly across the country. And if you project forward to 2050, there are some jurisdictions that will not have other options, and therefore will be looking at using fossil resources, and we'll just have to figure out ways that we're going to be able to mitigate it in those jurisdictions, whether it's through direct air capture or carbon capture utilization, or perhaps some technology that doesn't exist today that may exist in 20 years from now.
Thanks. Hey, Francis, you mentioned net zero 2050, and for many of us, that's a long, long way away. The more pressing concern seems to be the e-vehicle mandates by 2030, 2035. And can you comment, one, on the pace of investment and infrastructure needed for that? And two, what is the electricity sector doing to work with the automotive sector to either A, ensure that infrastructure is in place, or B, make sure that we Canadians and our governments have a pretty realistic conversation about that? It just seems a little bit ambitious at this point. 7 years from now, right, to really be moving.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Bob. You know, the timelines, the 2030 timelines, and in the case with respect to electricity and the commitment to have a net zero grid by 2035. In terms of infrastructure investments, 2030 is tomorrow. I've been saying that for a couple of years now. Now that it's down into the double digits instead of the triple digits in terms of counting the months until we get to 2030. Maybe I should stop saying that, from a planning, infrastructure planning standpoint, 2030 is tomorrow. Maybe I should be saying 2030 is like this afternoon. We, of course, there are concerns with respect to our ability to get infrastructure built in a reasonable time, and also the reality, and a number of people who are on this panel are aware of this as well. Our regulatory burden over the last several years has increased, not decreased. So it's becoming progressively harder for us to build infrastructure. I mean, we could talk endlessly, frankly, about specifically on electric vehicles. I share the concerns of many. I'm also one of the people that's on waiting lists for some of those EVs in terms of the ability to get them to deliver. But it is, for me, part and parcel of a larger concern with respect to tight timelines, very aggressive goals that have been set, and frankly, the need to have greater clarity in terms of what policy support and policy instruments are going to be put into place for us to be able to achieve those goals.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, certainly the net zero grid by 2035 is one thing, just doing that to meet ongoing normal economic growth, but then to
and now add electrification on top of that.
Massive transformation, additional load of e-vehicles. There seems to be an assumption that just because we want it, it's going to happen, and it seems worrying. But thank you for your work to help try to create some sense in that dialogue. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and there's a number of organizations, Bob, that are getting involved in this space to try and move it along. There of course are our associations, but we've been working to put together additional voices in that space. CEA is one of the founders of a new organization called the Canadian Transportation Alliance that is seeking to do more research and policy research in this space. But there's lots of additional players. And you know, when we have new players that crop up like this, it's because there was a need and because there was a gap. So you know, I'm hoping that some of these new players will be able to bring some new ideas to the table.